Hi, everybody. We are very happy to have another episode of the world in 2050 and beyond. And we are very lucky to have today a very interesting and very, very exciting topic. It's our security. And we have a great guy, the one who can speak about security nowadays. He is skilled in geopolitics, in international security, and we are really happy because he's one of the leaders of the Geneva Security Group. And, Jean-Marc, very, very, very thankful you joined us. And the very first question for sure about future, having your background in specifically in geopolitics, how you see our world will look like in 2050? How it's going to change? What do you think?
Right. Okay. So, first of all, thank you for having me on this podcast. What you have to look at when you try to think about the future are mega trends and weak signals. And so, if we look back in the last 30 years since the end of the Cold War, we moved from a kind of bipolar system pitting against two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States, one won over the other. That opened up an era of hegemony in international relation, which is fairly rare, where you have one power that is so powerful that it has basically free reins in international politics. So if you take, for instance, the United States, 2011, the US was spending more in terms of defense budget than the next 14 followers. And so at the same time that you have this US hegemony, you also have a international system that got much more connected, rise in exchanges, in trade, in different relations between countries, and this was globalization. And the issue with a universe system is that it attracts competition. Obviously, you have governments that wants to compete, states that want to compete with the hegemon. So on the one hand, what we've seen over the last 30 years is the emergence of new competitors, especially over the last 10 years, with the rise of China, and the US is still ahead of China and all its other competitors, but the gap is narrowing, and this is shifting, if you want, the dynamics in the international system. So, what we see emerging now is a competition between worldview, I'd say, one encapsulated by the United States, and that basically supports liberalism and democracy, and the other by authoritarian countries, China and Russia. And that was very visible on the eve of the Olympics game, the opening of the Olympics game in Beijing, when President Xi and Putin met in Beijing, and they basically stated that was recorded in a statement, their worldview about how the world should look like in the future. And the basic argument is that the world that we inherited from the end of the Cold War is over. Western supremacy and hegemony is over, and now it is their turn. So you have this development, and this development is likely to continue. And what we are witnessing now is an increased polarization between this country, between different worldviews. Then you have factors that are also entering the equation. One is, what are the dimensions of power? And science and diplomacy probably are the first indicators of powers, because technology these days, especially artificial intelligence, and other quantum computing, synthetic biology, neuroscience, are providing governments with huge means of power. And you have a huge race at the international level, to the point that the globalization that we inherited in the 90s is coming to an end. You might have heard about technological decoupling. The US and China now wants to prevent the other from actually accessing some technology, and the way they do that is by decoupling. So meaning that they develop each their own technological system, and obviously this is creating new issues for those who are not in this competition because they are affected by that. At one point, these countries might say that if you're cooperating with the others, we will not allow you to cooperate with us. So you don't have access to the market, you cannot use their technology. So that is, if you want, the traditional geopolitical game. And what also has emerged over the last 30 years is the rise of non-state actors and the rise of individuals. Think about multinational companies, Apple, Facebook, and other Meta. If Apple would be a country nowadays with valuation of $3 trillion, it would be probably the 6th or 7th richest country in the world. You have a company that has reached major milestones in terms of valuations, NVIDIA, that basically manufactures processing units in computers, and in a span of a few years has actually overtaken now Apple in terms of valuation, because their GPUs are very much used to power artificial intelligence. And so you end up with private actors that have more financial power than governments, or most governments, and also have data. So here you have new actors that enter this equation, and on top of that, you're also empowering people through the democratization of this dual-use technology. So if we look at that, we can see a mega trend where we see increasing polarization between the countries that are the most powerful, i.e. China and the United States, and they are building up a network of alliances, while at the same time, the picture is more complex, because weak signals also shows you that you have new actors that have emerged that can play a role. Think about Starlink, for instance. In the space industry, more than half of the satellites that are orbiting around the Earth are from Starlink, which is a private company. Right, and that also creates new implications, because you know that Starlink is basically providing internet connection to the Ukrainian on the battlefield. And when you suddenly have Elon Musk saying that, okay, well, maybe Ukraine should start talking to Russia to make peace. But he has a huge leverage, because basically he has access to the switch button to switch on or off telecommunication in Ukraine. So here, what you see are these actors that have emerged, and all these non-state actors and even individuals that have now the means to have a strategic impact. So in 2015, we can see the mega trends of increasing competition between these two blocks, but at the same time, there could be black swan in terms of suddenly one of these actors making a major breakthrough. It could be technological breakthrough, or using some of this technology and have an impact that was not intended and we were not expecting.
Yeah, Jean-Marc, you touch on the technology and how it changes the world we live in, and it makes new actors emerge like we have never seen before, right, in our history. So you mentioned a few technologies like neurotechnology, artificial intelligence. I would add synthetic biology and others. They have huge potential, right? But they also come with risks. And how do you think the international policies of the future could be shaped to balance this dichotomy between innovation and security? How to balance this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And it's a question that I encounter almost on a daily basis where I'm interacting with international organizations here in Geneva, or NGOs and even governments. Indeed, these technologies have a fantastic upside potential. Think about COVID. The fact that in less than a year we managed to come up with a vaccine. It was because we used AI to process data, and also we're much more connected. So we exchange information, and also for synthetic biology, we were able to develop new tools to manufacture a new vaccine. But you're also right that most of this technology, or if not all now, are dual use. So if you can use them to find a new vaccine, so it's potentially possible to use them to find new pathogens. And the issue here is really about guaranteeing the development of this technology, not stifling innovation, so maintaining the pace at which this technology develop, while at the same time guaranteeing that this technology could not be misused, or if they are, that we are still the ways to control them. And so it's the issue of security versus innovation. And this is a very difficult equation to solve because, first of all, there are no limitations to human ingenuity. So you can always develop technologies that you think are not harmful and could be used for nefarious purposes. As a matter of fact, if you take, for instance, cryptography and blockchain technology, two technologies that were developed for good. Blockchain removes intermediaries between sellers and buyers, so that the sellers can say a higher price and the buyers can buy at a lower price. And cryptography, secure communication online. But if you combine both, you get ransomware, because the ransomware will need cryptography to block or unlock your computer. In order to unlock your computer, what you will need are you will have to pay a ransom. This ransom will be paid in cryptocurrencies, so that you cannot track this payment, or it will be much more difficult to track. So the point here is that you need to embed, while developing this technology, a new philosophy. And most of the technology that we've seen over the last 30 years was developed by private companies, startups, whose main concern is to generate cash. And cash is king, and you know that when you're an entrepreneur, you are burning cash. And so your concern is actually reduce the rate of burning cash or increase revenues. So therefore, it's a race to make money. And so the security aspect of this technology is not really well thought through, the security implications. And therefore, on some of this technology, we're talking about synthetic biology, we need to embed, probably in some of this technology, we need to develop them with security in mind, so that if anything goes wrong, there is a way to neutralize this technology, or what we call a kill switch, or guaranteeing that at any point we'll be able to deactivate, this technology. There was an example in 2017 or 18, when a virus called WannaCry was launched to target Ukraine and other countries, spread beyond Ukraine, and it led to the neutralization of a third of the computer of NHS. And so it was possible to actually neutralize this malware, because in the code there was a kill switch that was written, and a researcher basically found it and activated it, and then it basically neutralized the malware. So this is an example of how we should develop such technology in the future. It's not about stifling innovation; it's about making sure that if this technology, because some are really, really powerful, and there are debates, AI, that AI could get out of control, and there are lots of buzz around that, because some people are actually, instrumentalizing this this line of argument. But there is also critical and deep analysis to make about some of the development in AI. So that leads to a very wide approach in terms of how can we make this technology more secure. Is first by embedding very early in the development of these technologies, the security concern of these technologies, has also to do with governance and getting an agreement on what we can do with this technology, what we cannot do. But then the issue is that because we are moving into an increasingly polarized environment, the likelihood of getting a global agreement on some standards is getting smaller and smaller. Look at global warming. We haven't managed to actually get to any significant agreement, even though we are all saying that there are developments in the field that proves that the entire what we call global commons. These problems are global commons. They affect everyone. We should actually be together in order to fight it. And the last issue is about information, because increasingly this technology democratizes access to information that in the past were only in the hands of a few actors. And some of this information, you do not really want this information to end up in the hands of the wrong actors. And so this lines of argument is not very popular among scientists and academia, because obviously it's about sharing, it's about diffusing knowledge. And I'm absolutely not against that. That's very important. But we should, for some of this technology, and not all the technology, but some aspect, of this technology, we have to be really careful about what kind of information we let out, and in the future, probably because we are also witnessing increasing improvements and developments in robotics and automation, we are more and more creating machines that are able to conduct tasks that human beings are conducting. So if we talk about 2050, as a foresight exercise, you have to think about possible future. One possible future would be a possible future where all information that is available is almost available to anyone, individuals, but also machine. And machine increasingly being automatized certainly could have access to or develop technology that would not be overseen by humans, or that we do not want them to be developed. I'm not saying that this is the likeliest development, but at least we have to think about that so as to put safeguards not to end up in this situation.
Thank you so much, Jean-Marc. So especially since you touched upon the global warming part of it, I would like us to delve a bit more deeper into that, and I would love to get your inputs about the climate change, since it is increasing as a global risk. What are your predictions on its impact on international security, geopolitics when it comes to 2050? And I would also like to, since you spoke about the private engagement, whether it is about the satellites and Starlink, which you spoke about in terms of COVID, you spoke about the private engagements part of it, right? So what would be the role of a private sector when it comes to mitigating the global risk of climate change?
Well, no, the issue with climate change is that it's a global common. So we need to protect, if you want, the climate, as all of us, have a responsibility to act in a way that is not detrimental to the climate, because we will all suffer from that. And for that, we need an agreement. And if you look, you can plot there are graph where you can plot all the different meetings of the international community that set up new milestones, to curb, if you want, emission of CO2 or other measures, and then you plot the rise of temperature, and you see that it's almost a line, and each time you can look at, on these lines, you had different summits, but they had almost no effects. Think about COVID. COVID was in a way the black swan where human activity was granted to halt, and even with that, which is an event that was completely unforeseen in terms of stopping human activity, we haven't seen a major decline in terms of rise of temperature. So it's very likely that it will continue. And so based on this, what will happen from a international security perspective? You have lots of different consequences. Obviously, one is that some countries might actually disappear from the map. All these small islands in the Pacific, they have already starting to think about, where they will migrate. You will probably have major changes in terms of the temperature. For example, if you take Europe, you start to see now in the south of Europe temperature that you would have in Africa. In the Alps, the glaciers are melting. In Switzerland, which is a water castle, if the glaciers are melting, this will have tremendous impact for entire Europe, because obviously at the beginning we'll have much more water because the glacier will melt, but then we will end up in a very arid condition. So that will impact how people live. And if Southern Europe now have temperatures that are similar to Africa, people in Africa will be even more, even hotter. There will be movement of population. So there will be movements of migration that will happen. And over the last 10 years, if you look at, again, Europe, you can see that migrations are a major issue in domestic politics in the governments, right? Look at the recent European the election for the European Parliament, and look at the rise of far right movements in Europe. There is a discourse that these far right movements are, if you want, building up on this anti-migration discourse. Then you have obviously the issue of food and access to food and water. And it's not just about access, but also regions that were used to, grow specific plants, suddenly that will disappear, and you need to transition to new plants. So that will also shift domestic economy of countries. Then you can think about the unfreezing the permafrost, where you have pieces of land that were frozen, and when this unfreeze, suddenly we might actually witness new bacteria could be once again activated, or we might discover maybe new pathogens. This potentially could also represent a risk. So if you look at that, what you see is that as human beings, you don't want to live in a desert where it's 50 plus and no water. So as the climate is changing, the environment where people live, and it has been a constant in human history, are moving, are moving constantly. And that was not really problematic when the world was not so much populated, but nowadays that will create tensions. And these movements will probably be weaponized by some actors. So you see, this will have huge implication. And then the problem is also an issue of fairness and equality. You have some countries that will be less affected and some countries that will be very much affected. So then there will be the question of redistribution of of when how can basically international community can cope with that and take on board those that have the misfortune of being directly affected by this. So and on top of that, demography is not slowing down. So while the conditions are changing, the way we live, we are also increasing demography. That will put even more pressure on these movements. So it's very difficult to project what will happen because this is such a systemic phenomenon that it's not just one thing that is changing. Everything is changing, and so you have ripple effect. The second, third order of magnitude effects are networked effect. You cannot look at that only in a vacuum. You need to consider the entire changes. If one thing changes, you cannot just use one variable and say, okay, this thing is changing and the rest remain constant. No, everything will be affected. The question is how to analyze this network effect. And this is very, very complicated.
Absolutely understanding, but also a little bit scary. The picture you are painting is giving us more food for thought. And what I was thinking, I combined what I just heard with what I heard the first time we met each other, because you showed a picture and mentioned in how many seconds people recognized who this person who is speaking is, and immediately spotted who you are, where you work, what you do, and so on. So if we are coming back thinking about the cultural awareness and the cultures on the planet Earth, because you spoke that some countries will not exist and so on, how important is cultural awareness in formulating our foreign policies so that the international business also understands the strategy and we all together are somehow secure for at least 2050?
I think it's not so much a cultural problem. That it's much more a geopolitical problem, because what you see, I mean, there are some solutions. There are some solutions in terms of trying to reduce our emissions. Again, think about COVID. Remember, I don't know how it was in your country, but in Switzerland, it was things will never be the same again after COVID. Think about air transportation. It looks like people were saying that we will no longer travel to with low cost airline companies to go on a weekend in Prague or Ibiza or from Europe, just for the weekend. This will change and the world will be a different place after COVID. Think about the mask, that we're all wearing masks during COVID. Look at now how many people in Europe, I'm talking, because in Asia it's different, but that memory has gone. So here, the issue that, if I may a bit look from a more systemic perspective, it's not so much about culture, but it's a question of incentive. And the problem that we're facing with global warming, but this global common problem, is that our short-term benefits are much more important than our long-term loss. All right, your short-term benefits to take the plane and go on a weekend to Paris or any other cities in the world is much more rewarding short-term than thinking about, okay, if I go to Paris by plane, I will basically consume I will contribute to pollution, and this could have an impact in 5, 10, 15 years. And so this asymmetry between this short-term gain and long-term loss creates a situation where there is no incentive for you to restrain your behavior. And so the question comes, how can we change that? And it's very difficult. In democracies, for instance, if you're a politician, politicians are elected on a 4 or 5 year cycle. And if you're a politician and your program is to say, okay, now I will increase the taxes or the price of gas 10 times so that people are less likely to drive their car, but in return, your grandchildren will live in a better world. I doubt that any politician who would go along this line of argument would be elected by the population. And so you can see here the problem that we have to face with that. You could say that authoritarian countries could be better placed to deal with that. In a way they are, because you remember Beijing, prior to the Olympics, was very polluted. The Chinese government decided to organize the Olympics in Beijing, and then they took really harsh measures to stop traffic, and that was it. So you have this asymmetry that is very difficult to reconcile from a democratic perspective. The best way would be to have a process that by themselves people are behaving in a way that is beneficial to the environment. But the issue here is really to find mechanism that will actually make each of us think that our long-term actually benefits are much more important than our short-term benefits. And for now, I haven't seen any system that is that works. And as long as we haven't solved that problem, I don't see how we will be able to deal with that, considering that the last 30 years have been an exception in international history where there were some agreements between countries, where globalization worked, meaning cooperation, international cooperation worked, and that we're moving towards a much more polarized environment. In such a polarized environment, the likelihood to getting an agreement among leading power is much less probable, because states have no friends; they only have interest, and therefore they will try to make anything to actually pursue their national interest.
Yeah, if you allow me, Jean-Marc, to ask you something linked to that. So I was just a few weeks ago in Switzerland, where you are from, where you are talking from, and it was quite interesting to see a friend of mine who lives there was receiving by post all these explanations on what the vote would mean that she would cast. And all the options were laid out in a small booklet and a bigger booklet, depending on how much details she wanted to know. It's quite amazing, that level of detail and the consequences. So you were talking about politicians not having the incentives, right, to take decisions that might have long-term gains. So even a place like Switzerland, where democracy functions a little bit differently because of maybe if its size and history than other places, even there it seems to be difficult. But my question is more on from the perspective where I am now. I mean, calling in from Manila, so I'm surrounded by these Pacific Island states, the small Pacific Island states. What do you think small island states like the ones in Pacific and elsewhere, what strategies they could adopt in the future to withstand this complex geopolitical environment that is forming that you described? How they could enhance their influence or have a voice on the global stage? Because, for example, climate change might mean that they disappear from the globe in a few years.
Sure. Oh, for sure, that's obviously a major concern. I think some of these islands already have made agreements with some countries, if I'm not mistaken, Australia, to migrate. If when actually this will materialize. So, my original expertise was in small state security, and when you're small, you have to be smart. and you don't have the luxury to waste resources. On the other hand, there is also so much you can do. And for small countries, international organizations are very important, because for small countries, international organization is acting as a force multiplier. The ability to actually negotiate in a multilateral setting offers advantages to states, but those who benefit the most are also small countries. So we have seen in the past, small actors that have managed to come up with treaties. One of the landmark example is the landmine treaties. Where it grew up from the civil society and ended up as an international treaty that bans landmine. There are examples where that kind of development are possible. But again, you need to have a look at the geopolitical situation. And in a time of increasing polarization, the likelihood that governments will agree on a common position is much less probable than in the past. So unfortunately, for these small actors and small states, and in the case of the island in the Pacific, it's even micro states. They will, in a way, be completely dependent upon governance that is being decided in Geneva, in New York, or in this global hub for global governance. And the only way for them to have an impact will be to actually create alliances among like-minded countries, or find very important actors, powerful actors that will support the cause. And I'm not saying that the most powerful actors do not want that. The issue is much more that any issues these days can actually be used to undermine your adversary, because it's all about interest. And if you look at the South China Sea and the current developments that we are witnessing in the South China Sea in terms of China territorial claims of in the South China Sea, the conflict between China, the Philippines, Japan, Vietnam, you can say that that's not the most conducive environment to get an agreement. And if you have the misfortune of being an island or a group of islands in the middle of a major geopolitical rift, so in a way that you could use that to actually try to leverage your position, but in the end you also might be a victim of this competition. So frankly, it's going to be difficult for these countries. And on top of that, again, when it comes to, and again, I'm not an expert in global warming, but if you look at the dynamics of this development, even though today we would completely, change the way we are working, think again at COVID and the impact it had on climate. It would take years to reverse the course of action. It's like a super tanker. Isn't it already too late now to actually stop this process? And even though we would agree today on stopping it, I mean, the dynamics, the inertia of this phenomenon would still make this kind of developments maybe not. It would still make basically represent a threat to this country, because it's not switching on or switching of the light. It's not that simple. And yes, I think that these countries are already making plans, to live in a world that would be very, very different.
Jean-Marc. So we cut back into the initial part of the conversation. So you were talking about technology, you were talking about artificial intelligence, you were talking about robotics. So I want to understand from you the risks of the cybersecurity itself. By 2050, what would be the state of cybersecurity? How can international cooperation mitigate risks which arise because of technology, because of cybersecurity? And this is the last.
Sure. But, cybersecurity, everybody talks about it. I mean, what we have to understand is that cybersecurity is about securing something that we do not see, that has been created by human as a domain, if you want. And because it's not palatable, if we talk about nuclear safety, you have a nuclear plant, you have uranium, you have plutonium. You understand that these materials are dangerous if not handled in the way they should, and could have consequences. Cybersecurity is not visible. The cyber domain is not visible and is very pervasive. So it basically it is part of anything that we are not doing. On the top of that, increasingly we are data. I think, if you want, I don't know if we can say that in English. So we're generating more and more data. We are translating physical attributes into bits. And so increasingly we are relying and we are also dependent on this data. So what happens is that it has already now become impossible to secure. I mean, in a way, cybersecurity has never been secured. If you're using your any software on your computer, you need to update your computer on a regular basis because there are lots of bugs, all right? And so, because the magnitude of the problem is growing by the day, we need to find ways to fix that. And to fix that, what we are doing, we are developing new technologies currently in order to process all this information, all this data. There has been major breakthrough in artificial intelligence. And AI is providing solutions that were not possible in the past. Algorithm had a capacity to analyze an amount of data at a speed that it was impossible to do in the past. But by developing this new technology to fix problems from other technologies, we are creating new problems. And to fix these new problems, we will need to create new technology. That is not from me. This argument was put forward by Ulrich Beck, a philosopher, in a book called The Risk Society. And so, in the future, what will happen? Look at where we are now. I mean, internet was invented about 30 years ago. At the beginning, if you remember, the discussions on internet was that it was a technology that would emancipate human beings because each of us would have access to all the information that is out there and will be able to benefit from that. So what we see there 30 years later is that this is one of the most oligopolistic economic systemic concentration of financial power and power that we have ever seen in the past. And also that this new medium can be used actually to do harm. So the question is, at any one point, who has the upper hand between the offensive and the defensive? And if you look at your antivirus is as good as the latest virus that had been detected, all right? But all the what we call zero-day vulnerabilities, these which are malware that have not yet been identified, will not be filtered by your antivirus. So as we are generating an amount of information that is growing by the day, we estimate that 90% of all data or information ever generated were generated in the last 2 years. All right. So because again, we also see an exponential growth in terms of data generation. So because we are generating an awful amount of data, we are also, in a way, increasing the attack surface. Because nowadays, think about the Internet of Things. every device starts to be connected. And so here we are just talking about digital data, but increasingly with development in synthetic biology and also in neurotechnology, we are creating new types of data, neurodata and genetic data. And so when you start, to look at all these different data, and if you are able to put them together, then you end up with a potential tool that will have enormous impact, because you will be able to really understand how a person thinks when faced with certain external stimuli, and what is the biological reaction in her body and as well as in the person's brain. And that is completely new. We haven't had that in the past. So the cyber domain will remain, and cybersecurity will remain, and the attack surface probably will grow by the day, but you have to factor in new type of data that will enter the equation, and that will create scenarios that probably we haven't thought yet about. The fusion between machine, increasing fusion between machine and the brain. The ability to communicate between a brain with a machine, between machine and machine. And so, whereas, take an easy example, everybody in the world is confronted with hacking, heard about stories of people being, ransomware and having to pay. Does it change anything in your behavior? No, not really. Okay, people are still, not having to pay basic hygiene. Even though you would have it, the tools to actually attack you are becoming even also much more not clever, but much more sophisticated every day. So the question is really, are we able to keep pace with the speed of development with technology that will solve some of these problems, that will patch some of these cybersecurity issues? And again, for now, I don't see, look at deepfake. Deepfake has propagated technology that was invented in 2014. By 2017, you had the first example of deepfakes, video of deepfakes, and how now if you look at the proliferation of this technology is growing by the day. And so some people would say, okay, well, if you look at the deepfake of an individual, very often you have more fingers than a traditional hand, or the ears are a bit weird. Well, then people would say, well, look at the number of fingers or the shape of the ears. Well, yes, you can do that, but it's just a matter of time before you can develop an algorithm that will fix this problem. So the question is, who will win between innovation that will have an offensive or a harmful impact, and the solution to deal with that? Then there is the other issue, which is quantum computing, and quantum computing will have a tremendous impact on the current computing architecture, especially in the field of cryptography, because if some quantum computer are already being developed, but if they become more easier to use and also democratizes, then there is the issue that all our cryptographic system will become suddenly completely irrelevant. So thinking has to be done, and there is already thinking done into quantum cryptography, but this will completely change the way we'll have to deal with projects. Think about all the data that now are being generated, and sometimes we don't have the power to process them. Well, with quantum, this will no longer be an issue. So there will be a huge change in terms of the way we'll be able to do things for good, but also way things can be done for bad. And on top of that, you also need to factor in And this links also the issue, the discussion that we had earlier in terms of climate and the environment. We saw exponential growth of computing power, of data generation, but we also saw exponential growth in terms of energy consumption. It is estimated that by 2025, so next year, I think a quarter of all energy produced will be consumed by by anything that is digital. So unless we come up with new energy model like fusion, we also have some problems that we have to deal with. So everything is actually connected, and it's not by acting just on one aspect that we will solve the problem, because it's a network environment, and you have to think in networks. That's not easy at all.
Oh my God. Thank you very much. I mean, I heard many scary parts that you painted for us, and I heard many opportunities and many positive sides. So we all wish very much that the future, and now and in the future, the humankind will be intelligent enough to use that opportunities to live in a more secure and more nicer and more beautiful world, and not use that opportunities for bad. Thank you very much for being here. This was truly, truly exciting, and we very much hope that the future for everybody will be much, much nicer, and the risks are there.
Thank you. Well, hope in the military, there is a say, hope is not a plan, but we need luck. No, we need luck, but we need also to actively work in a way that we are creating the condition for things to go in the right way. And again, this technology offers fantastic opportunities to actually really improve the way humanity is living, but you have also to be aware of the downsides and how this technology can be used for nefarious purposes.
Jean-Marc, before you get, can you just repeat what you said when there was no recording? Because we if you don't mind, because I think that was so nice about Molière. I think it was foresight and connecting it to.
No, I was just saying that you were talking about foresight methods, and I told you that I'm not really using foresight method. It's much more experience and in diverse field. And so I was saying that I do foresight without knowing that I'm doing foresight, like the bourgeois gentilhomme in Molière that was speaking in prose without knowing that he was making prose. That's the analogy I made.
Thank you so much. That's a nice excerpt. So it was exciting and very insightful. Thank you so much, Jean-Marc, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marc. Since you spoke about Molière, I actually searched out on it, and I figured out that yes, that's a wonderful book. So yeah.